Aiy-yu-kwee, Malita, and this is my channel, The Midnight Librarian, and today I'm going to be talking about my review for Louise Erdrich's Future Home of the Living God. Now, this book came out in 2017. I got it from Book of the Month 3 years ago. So, yeah, it took me a little bit. I listened to this audibly through my library. So, Future Home of the Living God follows Cedar's songmaker, who is Ojibwe, but was adopted out by a young white couple very young. So she doesn't have a connection culturally, or she has this disconnect from her Ojibwe blood or culture. She's 26. She finds out she is 4 months pregnant in a time where pregnancy is not only becoming rarer, but dangerous. Society is slowly falling apart. Scientists are believing that evolution is working backwards as it is getting more and more dangerous for women to have children, as there is a high mortality rate for the babies as well as for the mothers. So when Cedar finds out she is 4 months pregnant, she decides to go to the Ojibwe reservation and meet her birth family. From there, she tries to hide her pregnancy from everyone as she witnesses pregnant women being kidnapped by local governmental groups, government religious groups, and the father of her baby tries to hide her, and slowly society starts to collapse. This book is written as if Cedar is like writing this to her unborn child. It is fairly... I'm going to let you know right off the bat, I'm still trying to figure out my thoughts on this book. Mostly because I felt I had a disconnect from Cedar. I didn't really particularly like her as a character. But I'm still trying to figure this out because I understand that this could be based on my own biases. Cedar was adopted young. She had this disconnect from her Indigenous family, as well as her culture. So she very much had this white point of view, despite being Ojibwe, because she was raised by a white family. So there were some things that just didn't settle well with me, but I'm trying to go in with the understanding that a lot of people have this disconnect because they were either taken or taken from their family, Indigenous family, or just raised in a way that disconnected them from their culture. So I'm trying to recognize my privilege on being raised in my culture as well as with my Indigenous family. But there was just certain aspects of Cedar that didn't sit well with me. One particular was the narration of this book. I did read this audibly, so it is narrated by Louise Erdrich herself, and I don't think it was necessarily her narration that was making this feel off to me. I feel like it was the tonality of the narration itself. To me, it very much felt like Cedar was a white privileged hippie in a way. It just... And the way that she narrated, and I get that it was to her unborn child, but it felt condescending to me. It very much felt like this reminiscence of what I've experienced here locally. The place that I live is known for hippies, and supposedly who keep claiming they are open-minded and open to everyone. However, this town is very much built on racism and white privilege. So that in itself was kind of off-putting to me of this book, but I'm trying to look past that to figure out how I actually feel about the content of this book. So that's just kind of based on my experience. I've heard otherwise. I may have to read this at some point again physically, just to see if it's any different. But there was other things too that didn't sit well with me. I also tend to shy away from anything to do with religion, particularly Christianity or Catholicism. It's just not my cup of tea. It's something I tend to shy away from because it makes me uncomfortable. It was something that was part of my life for a blip. I wouldn't say forced upon me, but I don't remember necessarily good experiences from it. So I tend to shy away from religion in that aspect. So Cedar is a practicing Catholic. Even that, I don't know, there were certain aspects of Cedar that I didn't quite understand it or get, and it didn't sit well with me, particularly because it felt like just the way she talked about Catholicism made me think that she only joined in spite of her adoptive mother, who is also like I don't know, the whole vibe to me very much felt like privileged white hippies. So yeah. So the narration was one thing that kind of bugged me, and there was just certain aspects, particularly when Cedar had met her birth family, that didn't sit well with me. It very much came from this. We read from her. Obviously, we read from her perspective as it's her telling the story to her unborn child, but there was just certain things that she had thought and said that I found very disrespectful. Cedar very much has this disconnect and colonized mindset that makes me feel like she disrespected her birth family, like in a way that I don't know. It was just very. I had problems with it, and I'm having a hard time explaining why. So I apologize if this review seems a little scattered. I'm still trying to organize it. I thought that doing this would help organize it, and apparently not. I did want to learn more about the society of this world. This is a dystopian, which good on Louise Erdrich for being able to get into even. There's not very many Indigenous dystopians out there. So this was fairly intriguing and curious to me. I wanted to know more about it. The little we got was like interesting enough to the point where I was actually taking notes because I read this at the beginning of November. We were in the midst of the election. So despite this being published 3 years ago, it still felt fairly relevant in terms of how society can flip on a dime. So there was that aspect that I really wanted to know about. I thought Cedar was very creative in terms of immediately getting her cash out and getting items to be able to trade in case U.S. currency was no longer valid, which smart. It also had the discussions of where would you go if society started changing as rapidly as it was in here. So the U.S. government basically disintegrated, and people in communities created their own government. And in Cedar's case, where she lived, it was, I believe, a Catholic organized government that started renaming the streets after Bible verses and made sure that the neighborhood went to community barbecues to check in on everyone, and wanted to see titles to houses and all these governance things that were a little scary. And it definitely made me think, going, yeah, I'd probably return to the reservation if something like that happened, or if something. There was that yeah, I don't know. It was pretty scary to read during the time that I read it. The other characters in this book, like I said, Cedar's mom and dad very much felt like privileged white hippies. I did appreciate Cedar's mom in particular being able to help her daughter out when she could. But their relationship felt odd to me. I think the only person I enjoyed in this book was Eddie, who was Cedar's birth mom's husband, not Cedar's birth father. He had an interesting outlook on life and was overall very like, I don't know, he was just enjoyable to read about and read into, but no one was as fleshed out as Cedar herself, which made sense just because Cedar's the main character, but was also just kind of like, I want to know more about those around you and what's happening around you. This book also very much invoked a sense of fear, and it did a very good job at that, just in terms of how helpless Cedar ended up becoming as she was in hiding. That's one thing I definitely connected her with her on, was in particular was when she was in hiding, she wasn't allowed to go out of her house, so she spent weeks just in her house because she was showing, which very much reminds me of the current pandemic. So, and she often found herself just looking out in the backyard and noticing different things and wondering if they couldn't get food, because grocery stores had looted the stores for what they could. People bought up everything. There wasn't much gas. And of course, like, people were starting to stock up on guns and ammo to protect themselves. It was, yeah, like I said, this evoked fear and a sense of helplessness, which, yep. There was other aspects. I'm trying to think of a way to describe this without giving things away. But, like, the fact that pregnant women were being kidnapped and snatched was fairly frightening as well, because it was for their own good. Oh my goodness. So that's one thing I'm finding that some books are relatively good at, and one thing that I like. It's one of those things where I really enjoy if a book can do this, but it also frightens me to no end, is that sense of helplessness, the sense of you can't do anything to stop this because either no one's going to believe, like, your power is completely taken away. That was one thing that I enjoyed but disliked about the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. That freaked me out. There was another one which was, it was Sorcery of Thorns. There's taking away a woman's power and rights and making it so people either didn't believe you or that you couldn't leave, or the sense of, like, trapped is so frightening to me. And it's almost claustrophobic. Like, I can feel my chest starting to tense up just kind of thinking about it. Holy crap. So this did something similar in terms of pregnant women. And basically there's a recruitment of pregnant women having to turn themselves in for the good of them and their babies. And then eventually it became a reward system that if anyone turned them in, that they'd get rations or something. So yeah, this was a very bleak book. So if you couldn't tell, even though I particularly I'm still trying to think about what I thought of this book. Right now it's a hesitant 3, but I'm still getting my thoughts together. I still encourage you to read this because I do find it very interesting, and it brings up some interesting discussions, though I would like to note that I have been told that this is quite different from her regular works. Just because I particularly didn't like Cedar doesn't mean that you won't. So these are all my opinions. Take them with a grain of salt. Figure it out for yourself if you enjoy this or not. But yeah, I don't regret reading this at all. This may be bumped up to a 3.5. Because it does make me think a lot I'm realizing, like, I keep going back to it, and I read it at the beginning of November, and it's almost the end. So if you have read this book and want to discuss, I would love to hear your thoughts down in the description down below, or chat with me on other social media sites. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads. I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on what you thought if you read it. If you are interested in picking it up, let me know. And that is my review for Future Home of the Living God. I apologize once again that if it was a little scattered. Social injustices are still going on. Please do your research. Like, share, and donate where you can. The pandemic is going on. I hope that everyone is doing well, keeping your distances, washing your hands, keeping your masks on, staying home, and hope that you are doing well and safe. And I hope you are in the mental mindset to enjoy your reading. I'll see you next time. Chew.